Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my 2022 NFL season preview. Today, we are here with the NFC North. Before we get started, I just want to quickly apologize that this video is going out a little bit later than normal. I've been getting over a bit of a cold, so if I mess up anything today or if I say something incorrect, that is why. So please bear with me. I did want to get a video out because I know next week is going to be it has potential being a little bit different in terms of schedule of when a video might be released. So just be on the lookout for that. But again, we will wait and see, and hopefully things will go normally. But if not, just know I will get the NFC South out as quickly as possible. So the NFC North, the team we're going to start out with is obviously the Green Bay Packers, and you can't start out talking about the Green Bay Packers without talking about the big decision that was made this offseason. So the two best players on the Packers, arguably, well, I think everybody will acknowledge Aaron Rodgers is the best player. But Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams were both free agents, or not free agents, excuse me. It was looking like Aaron Rodgers could retire or force a trade, and Davante Adams was going to be a free agent. And they basically made their decision that they were going to pay Aaron Rodgers moving forward, and they were going to let Davante Adams leave, and that is why Davante Adams is now a member of the Raiders and is no longer on the Green Bay Packers. Now, for any other team, losing a player like Davante Adams would be devastating. And I'm not saying it's not going to be devastating to the Green Bay Packers, but I don't think it'll be as heavy a loss as it would be to other teams. Now, again, before we even get into that, I think it's worth noting that the Packers were the number one seed in the NFC last year. And if you might remember, they had a small, little inconvenient run in with the San Francisco 49ers, and that ended up really hurting their Super Bowl chances because that is where they got knocked out in the same position where the Titans, who won the AFC, also got knocked out. So again, you get knocked out in the divisional round by a lower seed, and you lose your best player. So how do you recover from that? Again, you have Aaron Rodgers, which is already a lot better than most other teams can say. But their big, really only free agent signing was Sammy Watkins. And again, I hesitate to call that a big signing because Watkins is a glorified deep receiver. That's pretty much his bread and butter at this point. He's not going out there. He's not going to be a Davante Adams type player. And a lot of the really big roster filling moves that the Packers did were made in the draft. They got Quay Walker, who was their first pick in the draft. And I think that Quay Walker, personally, I think they took him a little high. I think that he is a good linebacker. I don't quite know if he's going to be as good as some of the other linebackers that were in the draft, but I think he'll be decent. They also got Devontae Wyatt, who will be, I think he'll be a great defensive line player for them. We'll have to wait and see. And they got Christian Watson, Christian Watson was this sort of odd wide receiver prospect who you sort of had people saying he could go anywhere from the end of the first round to the first pick in the second round, all the way to the very end of the second round. I think that where the Packers got him was perfect, and I think he will be one of Aaron Rodgers' new favorite targets. And I think that's the biggest question for the Packers is who exactly is Aaron Rodgers going to be throwing the ball to? And I think regardless of where you fall on that answer, I think the Packers are still going to be an incredible team. Again, you have Aaron Rodgers. You're not automatically going to fall off completely because you lose Davante Adams. But I do think you're going to take a little bit of a hit. So that's why I have them going 11-6 this year. Again, I could see them maybe going 10-7, but I don't think it's going to fall more below that. So with that being said, again, if I'm a Packers fan, I know I'm probably going to end up winning the NFC North again. Again, we'll have to wait and see how the other teams do. but I am carefully optimistic because while I might win the NFC North, I don't know how I'll fare in the playoffs. Up next, we have the Minnesota Vikings, who have been one of the stranger teams in the NFL as of late. The Vikings have always sort of been that team where you're like, they're good enough, but they're never good enough to make it past a certain point. Kirk Cousins is their starting quarterback. He's a type of player that I would put into a quarterback game manager role. Again, not quite like a top 15 quarterback, but not someone who you'd call bad. He's in the Ryan Tannehill, Derek Carr tier of starting quarterbacks. And you have two of the best offensive players in the NFC, and Justin Jefferson, who, in my opinion, is arguably the second best wide receiver in the NFL. I think maybe more likely third. But he's up there. He's, in fact, I think maybe in a few years he will be the best receiver in the league. And you have Dalvin Cook. The issue is it's never really been the offense. Of course, the offense ran by Kirk Cousins has always sort of been this hit or miss unit of, some weeks they're great, other weeks they are an absolute no-show. And it's really just been up and down for the Vikings. They're always one of those teams where regardless of how bad they might be, they always have a chance of making it into the playoffs just because of the players on their roster. But with that being said, it's not like any player that they got this offseason really put them over the edge. But again, the main reason I preface that is because a lot of their offseason moves was predicated around the defense. And I will start off by saying bringing in Za'Darius Smith is not a bad move. Za'Darius Smith is an incredible linebacker. I think you can probably argue that he's also sort of a edge rusher. He's sort of that Harold Landry type of player. He's not a bad pickup at all. But that wasn't really the position in need. Jordan Hicks as well, he's a good player. But again, not the position in need. And this is where we get to what they did in the draft. The Vikings made a lot of trades in the draft. They traded all around the board. And while Andrew Booth Jr. was not their first pick, I think Andrew Booth is probably their most known pick because he was considered to be a top 5 quarterback prospect. They got him in the second round. But here's why I bring this up is that was a position of need for them. It was cornerback. And I get they addressed it in the draft. And I get that, now they have depth at this position that is outside of a very old Patrick Peterson. I get that. The issue is, and this is the same thing that I would say about Trent McDuffie with the Chiefs, is this isn't like Sauce Gardner, for example, on the Jets, where there's not going to be this pressure on him to immediately perform because the Jets are in some sort of playoff push or anything like that. The Jets are not going to make the playoffs, and Sauce Gardner is going to have his time to, learn and make mistakes and learn how to cover the better receivers. Same with Derek Stingley on the Texans. Andrew Booth is going to automatically be put into a system where you're going to have the expectation that his performance is going to help you make the playoff. And I just don't know if having a ton of rookie cornerbacks or safeties or free safeties are really good for a team that wants to make the playoffs. Again, in a few years, I think that, this is going to be a different story. Maybe 3 years, Andrew Booth is one of the best cornerbacks in the league. But for this upcoming season, when a lot more teams have gotten more offensively capable, I don't think having rookie cornerbacks as your main corners is a good idea. And that's why I have them going 8-9 once again. I don't think this Vikings is a great team, but in terms of the positions that really matter, they really didn't make that many major upgrades. And again, I think maybe in a few years, you'll be able to look at the Vikings and say, okay, yeah, this past draft, they picked up a ton of incredible players and a ton of incredible corners and safeties. But for right now, if I'm a Vikings fan, you have to remember corner was your position need, and you're basically banking the entire cornerback position on a bunch of rookies. And up next, we have the Chicago Bears. Now, the Chicago Bears are a. Chicago Bears fans, I feel sorry for you. The Chicago Bears, I think, are one of those teams where they never seem to catch a break, and the front office never seems to hire the right people or make the right decisions or really do anything that really shows confidence in their abilities. And I think actually that is probably the epitome of this offseason for the Bears. So last year they went 6-11, and they primarily did that going between Andy Dalton and Justin Fields. And Andy Dalton is now a backup on the Saints. So Justin Fields is the main focal point for the Chicago Bears moving forward. Now, the first bad piece of news for Justin Fields before we get to their draft was that they didn't have their first round pick. The Giants had their first round pick, and so immediately they were behind the eight ball because they couldn't provide Justin Fields with one of the great receivers that was in this draft. They couldn't get one of the many great edges to replace their aging veterans, and they were pretty much at the mercy of whoever was available in the second, third, and so on rounds of the draft. But before we even get to the draft, of course, we had free agency. They started out with getting a very good defensive tackle in Larry Ogunjobi, who then had his physical not pass. So he once again became a free agent. And so they ended up getting Justin Jones as a sort of a replacement at defensive tackle, who, I mean, he's fine. Larry Ogunjobi isn't this like game-changing player by any means. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, I still would have probably taken Ogunjobi over Justin Jones. And then they also signed Byron Pringle. I mean, this isn't a bad move by any means. It's not a great move either. Byron Pringle was essentially the third, I guess you might even would say fourth, because Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like the fourth offensive option for Patrick Mahomes. And you would think that anybody being a potential option for Patrick Mahomes immediately makes them a, top, well-known offensive player. Byron Pringle never got to that level, and I mean, again, he's not bad by any means, but he is certainly not. He's certainly not going to be a game changer on the offensive side of the ball for Justin Fields. And you might notice I don't have any of their draft picks listed down there, and that's because there really wasn't much to say. I mean, I feel like the consistent theme for the Bears throughout the draft was that there were many picks where there were players available that could have made an instant impact and could have instantly helped Justin Fields and his development that they passed on. One of my, I think, probably first examples of this is Pickens from Georgia at wide receiver was available, and they went a different direction. And he would have been a perfect player to match with Justin Fields, because I think Pickens is one of those players who he didn't make the first round because I don't think he has as much upside or potential as the other wide receivers taken. But he's one of those players that is going to be a solid wide receiver. And that's what you need for someone like Justin Fields. And that's why I have them going 4-13. I think they didn't improve at all this season. They didn't get Justin Fields the help he needs. And they're not going to have a very good year this coming year. I'm sorry to say, Bears fans. The only hope is that, again, you get a top draft pick, and that is able to get you either one of the good defensive players or one of the, I think, few wide receivers that'll be in this year's upcoming draft. So I'm sorry, Bears fans. It's bleak, but if there's one thing that I would hope for, it's that Justin Fields really takes a ton of steps towards showing that he is really the future of the Chicago Bears this year. And last but certainly not least, we have the Detroit Lions. Now, the Detroit Lions are personally one of my most intriguing teams because I think there's no more perfect example of a team that is well coached than the Detroit Lions. Dan Campbell has completely changed the culture in Detroit. And while they did not have a good season last year, I think you started to see the evolution of the Detroit Lions near the end of the season. Jared Goff is not a great quarterback. Let's get that out of the way. He's not a great quarterback. He's not their long-term answer. And he's not going to be their long-term answer. He's going to be there for a few more seasons, maybe only this coming season, and then they're going to move on from him. But the big thing that happened last year is that it was shown that they have some good offensive linemen. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a great wide receiver. He's going to be their wide receiver one for the next few years. And they had some potential. And again, even though they didn't perform well, they got behind Dan Campbell's message of, we're going to be this tough, play hard, fight to the very end team. And that managed to get them the second pick in the draft. And they got Aiden Hutchinson, who is not only a local star, but I think he's a player that perfectly encapsulates what Dan Campbell's defensive philosophy is on the defensive side of the football. He's going to be that tough player who's going to go out and get you, that sack when you need it. I don't know if he will be this transcendent edge, but I can easily see him becoming a top 15, top 10 edge in the NFL. I think he was the best player in the draft. Don't know why the Jags didn't take him, but I'm very glad he's on Detroit. Jameson Williams, another player who, yes, he's injured. Yes, he fell down the board a little bit, but he has a potential of being an absolute stud on the offensive end. He's not going to play the first part of the season, but again, he's someone who long-term, him and Amon-Ra St. Brown have the potential of being an incredible wide receiver duo. And in the offseason, talking about players they picked up, DJ Chark, who has, I think, been a consistently sort of underrated player on the Jaguars, if you would consider any player on the Jaguars underrated. I don't think he ever quite got the recognition he deserved. I think he is a great young wide receiver who, I think they only got him on a one-year deal. I could be incorrect, so if I am, I apologize. But again, he's one of those players where, right now, you can tell that they're not sitting back and, building through the draft. They're not trying to build through the draft. Dan Campbell is trying to build a culture here. And he's saying, you know what, we're getting these players and we're going to see who sticks around for the long haul and who we can get rid of in a few years from now. And I think that's going to yield them a lot more wins this year. And I know there's, a lot of talk of, has Dan Campbell fully unlocked the Lions now after last season? I think he has, and I think a 7-10 record is about the max that I think the Lions are with this present roster. And I know that is a big change from last season in terms of record. But again, I think that, the momentum that was built at the very end of last season with the addition of the new players that they acquired in the draft and the offseason. Again, Jared Goff is not a great quarterback, but if you have a good football culture, that can pick up for many of the loose ends that you have from a player personnel perspective. And I think that is fully going to show this coming season. I think the Lions, they're not going to be beating any of the powerhouse teams, despite, again, I have them winning Week 18 at Green Bay because that'll be when Aaron Rodgers is being rested for the playoffs. But again, I think they'll be a good team, and I think in a few years, if as long as the front office sticks with Dan Campbell and they, fully buy into his philosophy, I think that this Detroit Lions team has a potential to go a very, very long way in the future. And with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at my top 5 players in the NFC North. My 5th best offensive player in the NFC North is Aaron Jones, running back for the Green Bay Packers. 171 rush attempts, 799 yards, 4 touchdowns, 4.7 average yards per rush, and an 82.8 grade from PFF. I mean, here's the thing. The Green Bay Packers use a dynamic duo running back core, but Aaron Jones is the superior running back. And I think that he's going to have a much larger role this coming season just because, as I've mentioned, this is going to be a learning curve for Aaron Rodgers. He's going to have all sorts of new wide receiving options that he's going to have to learn how they operate, what's the best way to get them the ball. And Aaron Jones is going to have to step up, and I think he will. And he's shown he's a good running back, and that is why I have as my 5th best offensive player in the NFC North. My 4th best offensive player in the NFC North is Amon-Ra St Brown, wide receiver, Detroit Lions. 90 receptions, 912 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns, 10.1 average yards per catch, and a 79.9 grade from PFF. As I mentioned, the Lions had this really weird phase near the end of the season where you could tell that everybody had bought into Dan Campbell's system and they were playing their hearts out on the field. And no better player personified this than Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I think, again, he's going to be in that top 15 wide receiver conversation by the end of the year. I think that if the Lions do win as many games as I have them projected to win, Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to have to be the catalyst behind it, and that's why I have him as my 4th best player in the NFC North. My third best offensive player, in the NFC North is Dalvin Cook, running back, Minnesota Vikings. 249 rushing attempts, 1,159 yards, 6 touchdowns, 4.7 average yards per rush, and a 65.8 grade from PFF. So not the best, but again, Dalvin Cook has proven throughout the years he's been in the league that he is one of the better running backs. Again, he's one of those players, as I said, there are 2 of them, which if you haven't caught on right now, the other good Minnesota offensive player is going to be on this list. He's the reason why the Vikings are always in the playoffs, and he's one of those guys where if you have him on your team, you're always going to have a chance to make a big play. And for that very reason, that is why he is number 3 on my list of the top 5 offensive players in the NFC North. And my 2nd best offensive player in the NFC North is Justin Jefferson, wide receiver, Minnesota Vikings. 108 receptions, 1,616 yards, 10 touchdowns, 15 average yards per catch, and a 90.1 grade from PFF. He's simply a top 5 wide receiver. As I said, he is one of the reasons why the Vikings will always be a contender in this division to make the playoffs. I wish that he had a better quarterback at times, because imagining him and the number 1 player on our list, who, if you don't know who it is by now, I think it's fairly obvious. But imagining them playing together and imagine what he could have if he had a top 10 quarterback in the NFL playing with him. It's incredible. But that's why he easily deserves the 2nd best offensive player in the NFC North. And the best player in the NFC North, I don't know how anybody could not have seen this coming, is the reigning MVP, Aaron Rodgers, quarterback, Green Bay Packers. 4,115 yards, 37 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 69.1 QBR, and 89.6 grade from PFF. As I mentioned, the Green Bay Packers, as they have been constructed the past few years, don't make the playoffs or don't contend for a Super Bowl without Aaron Rodgers. And he hasn't shown any signs of slowing up anytime soon. And he's just one of those players where, again, he's always a good quarterback. You never have to question if he is going to go out, play his heart out, and put on a performance. And there's not many quarterbacks or players like that. And until someone unseats him or shows that he can't do it anymore, he's the best offensive player in the NFC North and one of the best in the entire NFC. And with that being said, let's move on to my top 5 defensive players in the NFC North. My 5th best defensive player in the NFC North is Harrison Smith, safety, Minnesota Vikings. 83 tackles, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception, 7 passes defended, and a 77.9 grade from PFF. Harrison Smith has surprisingly been one of the more underrated defensive players, even though I think most people who know football know who he is. I just don't think he's ever in that conversation of elite safeties, and maybe he doesn't quite get into that category, but he's one of the better ones. And I had a very hard time putting together this list for the NFC North, but looking at his stats and looking at everything he's done throughout his career in Minnesota and everything he means to their defense, there's no way I could leave him off the list. So that is why Harrison Smith is the 5th best defensive player in the NFC North. My 4th best defensive player in the NFC North is Rasul Douglas, cornerback, Green Bay Packers. 52 solo tackles, 1 forced fumble, 5 interceptions, 13 passes defended, and a 74.8 grade from PFF. Now you might be wondering why Jair Alexander is not number 4 and why Rasul Douglas is, because objectively Jair Alexander is a better cornerback, but the best ability is availability. And Rasul Douglas has shown that if he's on the field, he's a good cornerback, and he was a pivotal part of the Packers defense this past season, and I think he's going to show it once again this coming year. I think that he is incredibly valuable, and going up against a lot of these powerhouse teams, again, even not powerhouse teams, in his own division, he's going to have to guard Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St Brown. So that's why he makes a number 4 best defensive spot on my list. My number 3 best defensive player in the NFC North is Danielle Hunter, defensive end, Minnesota Vikings. 23 solo tackles, 6 sacks, and an 80.8 grade from PFF. Now, Danielle Hunter, again, sort of like Harrison Smith, he's been this really good defensive player for a while. The issue is the Minnesota Vikings defense everywhere else is absolutely dreadful. So he's never really gotten the recognition he deserves as an edge rusher, especially with the current NFL marketplace being littered with insanely good edge rushers. But I don't want him to get overlooked because he's been a pivotal part of the Minnesota Vikings defense for a long time. And if they are to potentially make the playoffs this year, he's going to have to be a big reason why, and he's going to have to step up. And I think he will, and that's why he is my 3rd best defensive player in the NFC North. My 2nd best defensive player in the NFC North is Rashawn Gary, linebacker, Green Bay Packers. 27 tackles, 9.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and an 89.3 grade from PFF. I think the only reason why more people probably don't know about Rashawn Gary is just because Aaron Rodgers dominates every headline, every discussion about the Green Bay Packers. But I think a lot of times the Green Bay Packers defensive core gets overlooked. And I think you're going to see that with this player and the next player we're about to talk about. But Rashawn Gary is one of the better linebackers in the entire NFL. Again, he almost got to 10 sacks this previous season. I think he'll probably get to 10 this year. And if the Green Bay Packers do win their division again, he's going to have to be a focal point behind that. I think he will be, and that's why he's the 2nd best defensive player in the NFC North. And the number 1 defensive player in the NFC North is Devondre Campbell, linebacker, Green Bay Packers. 102 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 2 interceptions with an 84.7 grade from PFF. I mean, Devondre Campbell just does it all. He tackles, he sacks, he intercepts, He forces fumbles. I mean, he is sort of the do-it-all guy for the Green Bay Packers. Again, it was really tough choosing between him and Rashawn Gary. I think that honestly you can interchange them. I just went with Devondre, but again, I think they could be either way in either position. But again, the Packers have a great linebacking core, and those two players are at the core of it, and I think that is why Devondre Campbell is the best defensive player in the NFC North. Thank you all for watching. Again, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, leave your feedback in the comments below. Again, I'm sorry this video is going out a little bit later today. And I also want to remind you that next week's video, the schedule might be a little bit iffy, but I'll hopefully keep you all up to date on that. But for our next video, we'll be going down and seeing Tom Brady and his friends in the NFC South. I look forward to seeing you all then.